movement and formlessness. Tathagata, that which comes and goes. That's like one of the names for the Buddha. And that's a pretty real picture of what gender feels like to me. The idea of a non-dual gender, for me, it's like very aligned. The idea of not fixing too tightly, even to the identity of non-binary, I guess.
Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. In this episode, I sit down with two remarkable members of Esalen's staff, both of whom identify as non-binary. Sarah Lavelle, also known as Sawyer, and Abigail Barnes, sometimes known as Bo. Our chat centers around identity, expression, and what it means to exist beyond the binary. A little bit about my two guests. Sarah Sawyer is a facilitator and enthusiastic community member at Esalen Institute. They have been a full-spectrum doula for over a decade, as well as a student and practitioner of meditation, Buddha-dharma, and Relational Gestalt Practice in the tradition of Dick Price and Dorothy Charles. Sawyer is a devotee of present moment contact and liberation for all beings. You can often find Abigail supporting small children at Big Sur Park School, and you can occasionally find him preparing drinks / holding space in the lodge at Esalen Institute. In addition to her passion for travel and reading, they love solitude, silence, practicing Kaula Tantric yoga, and studying relational gestalt. This fall, Abigail will be moving to Stockholm, Sweden, to continue their exploration of consciousness and education across contexts and cultures. I'm super excited for you to hear this lovely conversation. Whether you're deeply familiar with non-binary experiences or just beginning to learn, I feel like this dialogue offers something for everyone.
Hey Sam, so happy to be here with you. I'm Sawyer. I also use my given name still, Sarah, and I'm non-binary, and often get coy and say that my gender is very wiggly, or that I, annoyingly maybe so a little excessive, that I feel post-gender. Just, it's not what you think it is and it doesn't really matter. It's kind of the sense I have about it. But when I sift through the current options, what feels really true for me is a non-binary gender identity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I use they, them pronouns exclusively. It's important to me. That's the only ones I use right now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sawyer, and thank you, Sam, for welcoming us here. My name is Abigail. Some of my friends call me Bo, which I identify with because it feels that it better emulates my genderqueerness, and I have found that I don't have full comfortability and confidence yet introducing myself as that. I tend to use Abigail in that, and I love that name. That is my given name. I use any pronoun, which feels the most representative right now, the simplest way, I suppose, that's two different things. It feels like the simplest way to express my gender identity. I would say I identify as genderqueer. I understand that non-binary is an umbrella term that includes so many other terms, and I don't know if it's the Aquarius in me that's no, I can't, this one is too used. I can't just identify as non-binary. And I identify with the word queer quite a bit. I think there's something that feels, I don't know, historically provocative about it, and I feel just drawn to it. So yes, I am non-binary and I'm genderqueer, and I use any pronoun.
If you could, what is
Sure.
sort of a simple way to describe what genderqueer means?
To me, I don't feel like a man. I don't feel like a woman, and I do sometimes feel like either. I feel like my experience of gender shifts and changes and evolves and mutates all the time. And there's something about the word genderqueer that also embodies playfulness to me. Also, I'm sure we'll get more into this, and my experience of my gender identity is very much tied to my gender expression, or at least that journey very much began with gender expression, and something about gender queerness feels representative of that to me. And in the end, all of this vocabulary is so new to our society, to our culture, to to medical professional to and so it's more just like that one feels resonant in a way that I actually can't put words to, which is funny because I'm trying to describe a word. Yeah. The beginning of my exploration, feeling more freedom in my exploration and my gender identity feels like it really started, around 5 years ago, around when COVID began. Right at the beginning of COVID, I moved from Atlanta, Georgia, back to San Diego. And I don't know how much of that was this coming to a home that had been my home, but just with this freshness coming back. I think a lot of it probably had to do with there was this space, you know what I mean? Like I was still working throughout COVID, and at the same time there was so many like commitments, obligations were just like going out the window. And so I felt like I both had the space of coming back to a place, and so almost like the newness of a home and bringing in, and simultaneously had like so many less external pressures, so many like less external obligations. And in that space I felt that I was first able to have the space to explore and question what felt true for me and who I was, how I wanted to express myself, and also how I identified in my entirely own personal experience. And that's when the questioning began. And when I first came to Big Sur, that was just like this like newness all over again. I was coming to this place and entirely starting new with a community. And so there was less of this kind of like weight and baggage of being around people who had known me, I want to say like pre-transition. It was just like, I was introducing myself, and I got to introduce myself however I wanted. And that felt totally freeing. And so I think my identifying as, I will say non-binary, that feels true for me right now. I felt like I had like the foundation to do so with so much like confidence. And I felt like I could be like received in that without any of the baggage of who I was before I started identifying as non-binary.
I can remember being really young, like the first concrete memory that feels like mine that I can really remember about my gender is when I was in kindergarten. Two things happened. One is my mom got asked to meet with my kindergarten teacher. She got a pretty serious like note home to her about me only ever playing with boys. I remember overhearing my mom talking to someone else about that when I was little and thinking like, oh, like conscious for the first time of like, oh, like looking at myself and thinking not boy, like, oh, like I'm not boy, and feeling like caught in some way, like panicking really, like feeling like, whoa, okay, not boy. I didn't know that. We have like a family joke. It's like part of our Familect, this like phrase that I used to use when I was really little that started in kindergarten, where I would call myself Sarah Michelle Lavelle, King of the Boys and Queen of the Girls, which is so me energy. and like part of the joke is that I didn't understand how monarchy worked. Like I thought if you were a ruler over boys, you were a king, and if you were a ruler over women, you were a queen. But there was also an aspect of it that I can look back and remember and feel like, oh yeah, that's that kid. Like, yeah, that's me. And I would say too that I can remember many times as a kid getting ready for the day, getting up and getting like dressed and thinking like, what do I want to be today? Like not thinking like, what do I want to wear today? But thinking like, do I want to be more like a boy or more like a girl? And feeling like a sense of choice and choicefulness over it. I was a really thin, sometimes worryingly thin kid. I remember liking that about myself because I felt very able to fuck with who I was showing up as that day. It felt easy to flow between. Yeah, like jumping forward a little bit, I feel like I can really remember a sensation in puberty of feeling like total betrayal, of like feeling like disastrously pigeonholed by what was happening in my body and feeling really distressed about that, beyond like dysmorphia, like feeling true dysphoria, like frightening anger at the way that my body was betraying something about me that I wanted to remain open-ended. Really difficult. But yeah, hearing you talk about your experience, Bo, and COVID, it's like there's an aspect too that like the step away from so much societal contact helped me, I would say, like organize more coherently my gender experience. In early COVID, it was one of the first times that I felt like enough space from other people to think more deeply about like how do I present physically, and am I happy with that? And do I feel like I have agency over who I am to the world? Yeah, there was a breathing space for that to reorganize. I would say too, honestly, a lot of my greatest teachers have been my partners, people that I've engaged in either very satisfying short-term or long-term relationships with, who have helped me gain language and understand myself more. Sometimes through hearing them go like, oh, you're a, whatever, you're an XYZ. Reflected in the warmth of a lover or a partner's understanding is a very helpful way for me to learn about myself.
What does non-binary mean to you on a day-to-day level in terms of emotionally or socially or even spiritually?
The identity of being non-binary for me feeds into like a general openness that I try to feel in life, like an openness to outcome, not having a fixed sense of who I have to be, but seeing what's actually happening in real time for me in life. And, I'm Buddhist, and the idea of a non-dual gender, for me, it's like very aligned. The idea of not fixing too tightly, even to the identity of non-binary, I guess. Tathagata, that which comes and goes. That's like one of the names for the Buddha. And that's a pretty real picture of what gender feels like to me, movement and formlessness. But socially, it's like in a very concrete way, it means feeling partially understood a lot of the time, or partially misunderstood, I would say, a lot of the time, and feeling like deep gratitude and awareness of who gets it and who gets the picture. It's also given me a lot more sensitivity and openness to other people, a lot less assumption about who someone is when they're approaching me. It's been a huge gift of an expansive feeling gender.
Openness feels very resonant for me too. And actually, I want to start with this social piece. My experience of non-binariness at this point has become, I would say, like quite distant from my social interactions. And I think that feels reflected in some ways. Yeah, actually, no, it feels reflected in my use of all pronouns. I mean, my use of all pronouns feels true to me, and it was born out of, amongst other things, protectiveness. I mean, when I first started to strongly and confidently identify with non-binariness, and it was exclusively using they pronouns, how much I had to advocate for myself was exhausting. I was telling Sawyer this story of just like of working the gate at like a fairly big festival, and just like, and being referred to in the third person quite a bit by other volunteers who were working the gate as she, and I like ended up sharpieing they, them on both forearms, like, get it right, and it was exhausting. And that wasn't just strangers, it was close friends too. And that was, having to assert my gender identity to people very close to me was deeply hurtful. And at the same time, I want to like defend my acceptance, of all pronouns, because it's not just a self-protective measure at this point. It's like I have come to separate my experience of my gender from people's perception of me. And that feels really, really good, and that feels really freeing. And when I am seen by someone, when someone chooses to see me and acknowledge me in my non-binariness, I feel a closeness with them. I feel seen, I feel held, and that feels really, really good. I remember like at one point I was like also using like its pronouns, and that really, there was this like part of my journey of being like similar to like when I was vegan for the first time, and I'm like, where does this spectrum from like animals to plants begin and end? Like we have like lots of sentient plants, right? And just being like, where does the spectrum of like human, like non-human animals and human animals start and end? And a lot of my experiences of God are in like the natural world, and to also understand like there is not a binary in humans and their gender, and really maybe there's not so much of a binary between humans and non-human animals, and just this connection with openness, curiosity, exploration, this grandness, this grand interconnectedness that does not fit into words and into boxes. And yeah, the fullness of that, the fullness of experience and identity and what we get to be and grasp and let go of.
It seems like it takes a certain amount of courage, because it goes against a norm that you inevitably have to explain and re-explain. What is it about being in your truth that, I suppose, makes it worth it?
Yeah, there's this like, I think it's Nietzsche. I heard a yoga teacher quote this quote, so if it's wrong, unfortunately this came from someone else. But there's this quote that I've held on to, and I think it's Nietzsche, that is, there's no price too high for the privilege of owning yourself. And beyond like a propertarian mindset, I think that the more that I tap into what supporting myself really looks like, which has been a huge part of my growth here at Esalen, what it means to truly support myself, that to me means treating myself tenderly, and often thinking about how I would support like a child version of myself, and thinking about how important it would be to me, and how often I hear parents gently and kindly but firmly reintroduce their kids if someone forgets their name, or if someone is saying their name incorrectly or something like that. There's like a sturdiness to the way I feel. There's like a trust I have in myself and in what my gender does. If it's not too difficult, that it doesn't feel impossible for me to just gently but firmly let someone know, actually, yeah, it would feel good to me if you would use this name or these pronouns, or, oh, I remember that you'd said this, and I'm not sure if I've ever told you, but I'm non-binary, and so that for me means it would be helpful if you would use these pronouns or this name. And also understanding that there's plenty of situations where it's just not worth it. It's a passing acquaintance, or like it's just not the thing in the moment that's needed. Again, there's a sturdiness there that I can trust. It's not going to wreck my life if someone that I don't know very well doesn't refer to me in the way that's congruent to me. It's kind of like someone, like calling me Sally instead of Sarah. It's like, I can kind of understand why you'd make that mistake. Like, it's not like criminal behavior.
Yeah, I mean, honesty has come to be one of the primary pillars by which I live, and I'm getting emotional. Yeah, I just I cannot and I will not refuse to live in my truth. I think the emotions that are coming up are the way that living in my truth has fortified my sense of self-trust. It's like reminding me of this story that I told you yesterday. I think there was a lot of confusion initially around the way that my gender identity, my exploration, and like the emergence of my gender identity was connected to my gender expression. And there was a lot of self-doubt involved in that, because I was fully aware that those are in a lot of ways separate things, or they can be separate things. And yeah, so the way this comes back to your question is that my living in my truth is inherently tied to my self-trust, and I feel the strongest sense of self-trust that I ever have in my experience on this planet in this life. And that feels amazing. It feels so good.
You make an important distinction between gender identity and gender expression. I was just wondering if you could unpack that a little bit.
I mean, when I was living in San Diego, when my journey when my transition began, the way I dressed, the way I expressed was one of my primary forms of creative expression. And that was also, a different world. Like at Big Sur, there's not as many opportunities for me to put on a character, but that's what it was. There's so many times of like, okay, who am I going to be today, tonight? Like, how am I going to put things on my body, and who am I becoming, like, in that process? And that was so fun and exciting for me and creative. There was some that were super femme, and that was confusing in its own way, to be like, I'm choosing to dress super femme and I feel really good. And I feel really non-binary at the same time. You might not be able to tell. You might be presuming, but you could tell.
Well, this is like the quintessence of, like, I think any non-cis experience is that you're queering on more than one axis. So there's a queerness to, maybe I have a cis gender and maybe I have a queer sexuality, and those two kind of overlapping cellophanes make a color that's a mask of center presentation. And I think that looking at a different lens, like for you or for I, maybe, that there's a non-cis gender, there's a non-cis experience happening, and there is a variable gender expression. There's sometimes more femme presentation, sometimes more masc presentation, sometimes just off of the blueprint of what is typically worn by anybody, I would say. That's not a dig. I love the way you dress. And those combine, and it's not about making sense to the outer world. I think that's an important difference, is that so much of performed gender, especially for cis people, I think, is about correctly performing and repeating a performance of an expected gender. And I think the difference in a non-binary presentation or a trans presentation is that there's a deliberate, again, like a step off the blueprint. Stepping off of the need to perform correctly.
What are some common misconceptions about non-binary identities that you wish more people understood?
My least favorite misconception about a non-binary identity is that it's the third gender. That it's like, there's a sense of relief sometimes, I think even from allies, maybe especially from allies, that is like, oh, thank God, like I know what to call the other thing now. Like, okay, not cis, not precisely tidally trans, like not going directly from being assigned male to living female truth, but something else. So yeah, that's like a misconception that I'm always pretty quick to highlight, is that it's not the third thing, because again, like, yeah, for me, it's not one thing. I don't know that I need my gender to be static in any way, and it certainly doesn't feel the same to me day to day. It's very much a figure that emerges from the ground of who I'm with and how my life is.
You had said a couple of times that it's something that changes from day to day. Can you just give me some examples of what that looks like, feels like?
Yeah, I would say that there are some days where I wake up and I'm guided by how I'm feeling to present more masc or to present more femme on a certain day. And that has very little pattern. Most of the time I arrive to my day feeling genderless and feeling totally disinterested in the project of gender. So I try to provide myself options in my life so that I can operate and live most of the time without too much consciousness or need for consciousness of my gender. I'd like to give myself lots of options to wear and lots of options of activities and things in my life to make that pretty frictionless.
In what ways does a Venn diagram of trans and non-binary overlap, and in what ways are they distinctly different?
First coming to work here, and there was a trans person working here at the time. It was a good friend of mine, and they gave me a sticker. I want to say it said like "trans is beautiful." It was something along those lines. They gave me this sticker, and I was like, and they're like, yeah, like you're trans, right? And like, me, like, I'm trans. Who? What are you talking about? No, I'm non-binary. And they're like, yeah, okay, obviously, and feeling so thrown off. And I don't know what about that. I think a lot of it was, imposter syndrome. I think a lot of it was also just like awareness of all of my privilege and not feeling like I was experiencing the same sense of like, I don't like, I'm white. It's a big one. I'm cis passing. And so there was a lot that was like, I don't I didn't feel like I was experiencing the same vulnerability as that a lot of my trans friends face. And I think that was a lot of what was needing, that motivated me to feel like I needed to make that distinction. And maybe there was this other piece too that you touched on, Sawyer, of not wanting to be put into this like third category. I'm like, no, the whole point is that I'm taking myself out of a category. You know what I mean? And so having what felt like that label put on me, which I've come to like really shift, like, it felt like it was putting me into another category that I didn't want to be put into, because I didn't want to be put into any.
I think that there's like a hesitancy that I've felt, and that I'm imagining that you've felt, and I think you spoke like a little bit to it, acknowledging like a sense of privilege and an experience of privilege. But I think that it can be hard to claim or want to claim the term trans, holding a non-binary identity, especially being cis-passing or het-passing or whatever, because it feels like, well, there's actual trans people who are being deeply endangered and psychically and physically enacted upon by violence every day right now. And I think that there's like a sense that like, okay, if I claim a trans identity, I'm taking something away from people who need support or something. And that may be how people feel. I'm not sure about that. But I do know that part of why I was excited to have this conversation with you, Sam, and with you, Bo, about what's happening with our genders and what's happening in the world right now is because the greatest predictor statistically whether someone will act on behalf of a trans person is if they know one. And it feels important to me that if you don't think you know someone, you know me.
Are there ways that you feel misunderstood, either by cis communities or not?
Totally. Actually, another misconception is that when I say that I'm open to any pronouns, that means that you can use she for me all the time, and that feels totally fine and great. You know what I mean? And that's not really something that I feel open to sharing unless someone feels like inquiring farther. Because as I spoke to earlier, I feel a closeness with people who choose to honor me in the fullness of my gender experience. And if you're not putting forth that effort, if you're not making that invitation, then okay, I want that invitation. I want you to put forth that effort to me. And so, and that's okay too. I'm giving you the option to call me she or he exclusively. If you call me he exclusively, actually, I think that would feel better than calling me she exclusively. My favorite was when someone calls me he and then feels that they've made a mistake. They have this moment of realization and their eyes go wide and they're I'm like, yes, that's exactly the reaction I wanted to follow. So yeah, I think that is a misconception specifically about the pronouns that I allow people to use, that means that that I want people to use the range of them. And they feels best for me. And that's something I choose not to immediately share. That's something that I absolutely would share if people inquired further.
I make this joke sometimes that I'm non-binary, so anyone I'm having sex with is gay. I have the great fortune to have been born not just non-binary, but bisexual, and to be in a relational experience that's also non-monogamous. So as you can see, I really hate being shoehorned in any way. I'm also left-handed, if that feels relevant. But that for me, there's so many facets to the way that I've been able to experience, especially romantic relationship, but in a non-monogamous experience also, with so much of the pressure taken off of the main romantic relationship to function as the main social relationship as well, with so much credence in a non-monogamous lens to be given to the deep importance of friendships and the possible shades of what happens relationally between friendship and sexual congress, that it's been more and more doors opening to me, knowing more about myself. So knowing myself in relation to a cis person who's a guy or who's a girl, or knowing myself in relation to another person who experiences a non-binary identity, it's very solidarity building and it's very affirming. And beyond all that, it's very fun.
Do you feel like certain partners want you to affix to a certain identity rather than be free-flowing?
I feel that, I'll just shout out my spouse, who has been the most life-saving intervention in my entire existence, my absolute ally in gender fuckery, and my total ally, my total support. And there is no aspect of myself that I feel is required by my partner other than personal responsibility and commitment to the project of our relationship. And so this is not a person who's expecting me to keep the same job or want the same career goals for my entire lifespan. This isn't someone who's expecting that I'll maintain the same friends or the same, taking any other aspect of the self. I experience my spouse as incredibly supportive and excited and creatively involved with me in the changing aspects of my gender as time goes on. And I haven't experienced other partnerships where anyone was anything but delighted by what happens with my gender. And I'm very lucky for that to be the case. It has been a long time, like well over a decade, maybe, since I've had any kind of partnership where someone was, anything other than curious and optimistic about what my gender does. Yeah, which I think speaks to actually something I don't think I got to say when we were talking about misconceptions about a non-binary identity or trans identity in general, that it's not guided by like misery. It's not always this sense of like, I woke up one day and was like, I'm wrong, something's wrong, I'm not feeling right, I'm it's not just the misery guiding the light towards a truer gender expression. It's actually much more so, for me at least, like the joy is more guiding, that I'm more guided by going towards what feels so connecting and real, authentic, three-dimensional. I don't mean to say that there's no sense of loss for me and no sense of dysphoria ever. I just texted you yesterday about having a bad gender day, so there we are. But
can I ask you what's a bad gender day?
Well, I'll go there in a minute, I think. But okay. But I just wanted to say, in spite of like what I was trying to say earlier, isn't that there's no loss, no dysphoria, no etc. Just that it's not all misery. And it's not like this, I hear sometimes like, oh, wouldn't you just be happier if you were just a woman, just cis, just whatever. And how much happiness I'm finding and have found in a different expression, a truer expression. I was kind of having an off day yesterday, and it's like a, kind of like just like a restless unwellness in my body of feeling like, like when your hair doesn't look good that day, like when the gender's not gendering, it's like I felt for like a few overlapping reasons, like not quite right in my body and like hyper aware of sensation in my body and just feeling like off. And there were a couple of other actual things that had happened, being like oddly misgendered in a conversation with someone that I like haven't talked to in a long time. And so it was just a confluence of some like mildish phenomena, and I just felt good reaching out to my bud about that, because real ones know. It's like it's just how it is sometimes.
What impact has the current political climate with this current wave of anti-trans legislation and the gender fixity that's being instituted across the board, whether it's like in the military or on passport IDs? It's sort of like one has to write female or male. How is that affecting each of you in terms of, it seems like it's such a high level piece of the current administration's agenda to negate all of the realities which you have just put forward for me for the past.
This is oppressive authoritarianism. This is like cruelty for the sake of cruelty, I'm like becoming so dysregulated right now just thinking about everything that's been happening. Yeah, there's like a really wonderful book by Judith Butler, like patron saint of gender awareness in this country right now. That was, I think, her most recent book that's called Who's Afraid of Gender? And there's such a great exploration in this text about gender being a great, useful scapegoat for many valid worries and some invalid worries that people have about life right now. And that is like, the great American pastime is scapegoating. And that when we look at what's happening with a population of trans people that constitute like about 1% of American population, how much time and rhetoric have been focused towards, again, like animus, like psychic violence, real physical violence against this group. It's like, okay, I have to wonder, like, what is under this? Like, why this like vehement, violent, like deep fear and anger towards this group? It's been a lovely aspect of what's happening in a very terrible situation is that I have personally felt more of a coming forward from like my friends and family of support and wondering like how to act in a supportive way. I like remember telling both of you, like I didn't choose to watch the inaugural address and I had a plan to read a transcript of it later as like the least harmful way that I could interact with this like very radioactive substance, but was getting texts and like calls from people from my family and from friends throughout the day that were like, are you okay? Like, we love you. Like, you're valid. And so I was just thinking, I was like having an okay day, like in some ways, but was thinking immediately like, okay, something's really going on here. Like he must have said something about gender. I mean, there's like a murkiness to like my experience because I personally have the privilege of not having sought and not feeling a great need to seek like a government validation for my gender markers. Nor am I in California truly at risk of not being able to access, at least at this time, affirming treatment for my gender. But there's a psychic violence. It's been difficult. I've cried to both of you about what it feels like to be non-existent and like worse than non-existent to a structure that should be caring for me and supporting me.
I'm realizing that maybe one of the costs of allowing people to perceive me and my gender how they choose to and how they feel available to is I don't have people checking in on me. And I just had a really transformative experience this past weekend. I was at Tribal Grounds doing relational gestalt work that opened up what it can look like to take like how we can experience love through our despair and like what it means to be held in our despair. And I don't think I've had a lot of trust for like how I can care for myself and how I can be cared for by my community and by my loved ones in my despair. And that, along with, I live in a blue state. I'm not seeking gender affirming surgery right now. And so I in some ways I have the liberty to turn off. And in other ways, I don't have trust for the resources that are available to me if I turn on the reality of what is happening to people. And what is happening is devastating. And so I think about like people who are not just kids who are growing up, adults who maybe a couple years ago felt a lot safer to have the openness and the exploration that I got to have that I named like about 5 years ago, and what that how that's being taken away from people's abilities to know themselves and express themselves and to advocate for themselves.
How can allies, especially cis people, show up in a meaningful way for non-binary loved ones?
I think that there's nothing different about let me try this on and see if this feels true. I don't think there's anything different about what a trans person needs than a cis person as far as curiosity, openness, attunement, mutual care, and solidarity from each other. I think that what might be asked of a cis ally or or a gender unaware, maybe a pre-trans ally, is is the shouldering of some personal responsibility, choosing to educate themselves if they can, engaging in playfulness and curiosity about their own gender. And of course, like in the material realm, there's many ways to support the trans cause and trans people. But I think a lot of it's just what humans need, just that, milk of human kindness.
Check in. Like, how are you doing? How can I support you? It feels that simple in a lot of ways.
What brings you joy in your gender expression right now?
Some things that come to mind are like anything that calls on my self-efficacy. So like taking a session of like lifting heavy weights or dancing feels so good. There's some experiences here at Esalen. There's this amazing facilitator, my really dear friend Shauna, who facilitates some dancing in total or very near darkness. And that's been like some of the most gender expansive experiences that I've had while I've been here. Moving my body without so much awareness of myself or other people. It's been incredibly healing. Group sex, to be very frank. Shared non-sexual nudity, which I get a dose of here at Esalen in a very healthy feeling way.
Tell me about that. Why does that bring you joy?
Oh man, just the glorious sort of dumb humanity of like a bunch of different nude bodies with all of their, moving parts and unusualnesses and beauties. Just taking this very basic, very old human act of taking hot water together and just showering, regulating with nature, hearing the ocean, seeing the mountains and trees while just like sitting in hot water and not addressing usually the nudity. Just that being an aspect of a shared experience feels so healthy to me.
Yeah, I'm experiencing myself like quieting, and I have some curiosity around how much of that is feeling dysregulated or feeling, I don't know. The imposter syndrome is so real. It feels really real.
Well, tell me about that too.
It's funny because I was talking about how strong my self-trust is earlier in this conversation. And right now I think I'm having a hard time honoring my voice and my truth and what I am bringing to this conversation, because I don't feel vulnerable a lot of the time. And you know what? And I've only been like, I was reflecting on this. I was like, is this true? The last couple of days, I'm like, yeah, I've only been shown acceptance from the trans community, from the queer community. And at the same time, I continue to have a hard time accepting my place, my voice in that community. And that's feeling really real right now. And I experience joy in general in life right now when I'm experiencing like formlessness, when I'm like laying at the ground and looking at the trees and seeing the fragments of light coming in and feeling like almost no separation between my body and what's around me. Yeah, that is joy. And I experience joy when I feel like I'm provoking people, when I feel provocative, you know what I mean? When someone calls me he and then looks like terrified at what they've done, you know what I mean? Or when I'm dating like a cis seemingly het man who's like, what are you? I'm like, that's right. I don't know. You don't know. I feel joy when I watch people's preconceived ideas of gender shattering. And I feel, and I have some part of that, even if it's just witnessing. Yeah, that feels really good.
Let's end with this. What does a future look like where non-binary and trans folks are fully supported and celebrated?
Collective liberation feels like the way, because I think that it would be, to my mind, just as much of a misattunement for the pendulum to swing. Maybe there would be some good correction there, actually, if the pendulum were to swing to like championing and revering and valuing trans identity over anything else for a little while. That could do some good, actually. But that obviously a dropping of fixation on gender from birth would be interesting. I think dropping the idea that like a blood test at 10 weeks of pregnancy or a sort of internal nude of your own child tells you something about like something about what their life is going to be and how you should be with them could be good. I think I would like to see a world where people feel comfortable trying things and making mistakes. That would feel really good and celebratory of process in general. And that means that it's okay to try on a gender and to say at a certain point, like, oh, actually, that's not quite it. And to feel that there's space for changing your mind, for recognizing that, like, these experiences that we, again, like, hold so much credence towards are sort of not as solid, not as strong as we think. I mean, people should be able to exist with the freedom and the positive attunement from their caregivers and their communities to keep telling us who they are and let us support that experience and process without us assuming everything about each other. But that would take a culture of deep listening. I hope that we're up to that task. I don't know.
Yeah, the future you speak of feels so vibrant. I think I'm imagining like just seeing people. I'm imagining like this experience of like really being seen with loving kindness and with curiosity is a word that continues to come up. Yeah, and just honoring like the unfixed nature of this exploratory, turbulent journey that is understanding who we are in these corpses on this earthly plane. You know what I mean? Yeah, and so much openness to this is how I feel one moment and this is how I feel a different moment. And of course, those are completely different experiences. And you're seeing me in both of those and you're loving me in both of those. That future feels vibrant to me. That future feels like really joyful to me. It feels deeply connective. It feels deeply collaborative and deeply creative. And in this moment, it feels real. It feels like a really, like, it doesn't feel like I just have hope for that. It feels like I have like knowing that could and will exist. And that it begins in these interactions, in these conversations, in me looking at you and you nodding, you listening, you know.
I think there's just one last thing that comes to mind is that doesn't happen out of nowhere. We can't separate the trans struggle or any struggle for self-determination from class struggle and from race struggle, from sexism struggle, from nationalist and ethnic struggle. That there's a way that like that all gets to happen when people get a little bit more curious about equality and a little bit more curious about saner ways of being together. But it both feels very possible, and also looking at the stretch of kind of like human wreckage behind us, it's I have to believe into the moments of solidarity and mutual care, which I feel right now. I mean, I feel that deeply from both of you.
People's rights, people's senses of safety are being ripped away, period. Like, I am so angry, I am so hurt, and I am experiencing like deep despair. Will you hold me in that? Like, will you love me in that? Will you honor that is happening? That is not my truth. That is a shared like reality. And through that despair, like through that anger, how we can get to being with each other. Yeah. Thank you for honoring that what the reality we speak of is not here right now. the hope that the future that we speak of is not here right now. Yeah.
Thank you both so much, my friends and my colleagues, for having this expansive, courageous conversation.
Today's show is produced in conjunction with Shira Levine. Our theme music is by Nico Holloman. Additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. Think critically, because why not?